Menopause isn't about our bodies betraying us, but it's about our bodies evolving. Because the pleasure was good in the moment. It's really important that we flip the whole "my body is betraying me" narrative, because it tends to really set us up to be fighting against ourselves.
Welcome to the Hot Flash Health Podcast, where we're dishing out unfiltered truths about menopause with a side of sass and a sprinkle of grass.
Get ready to dive into the wild world of hot flashes, mood swings, and all of the other joys of being a queenager.
This ain't your grandma's podcast. No, we are here to talk our bodies, our fears, our passions, our desires, all while navigating this wild roller coaster ride of menopause.
So grab a glass of wine,
For free.
kick back, relax, and let's enjoy this hot flash wave together.
I'm Courtney Mamusha, and alongside me is my fabulous co-host, Dawn Fable.
We're just two outspoken broads who like to call it how it is.
Now, without further ado, let's kick off today's episode.
Welcome back to the Hot Flash Health Podcast. Today we're diving deep into something that so many of us struggle with, our relationship with food. If you've ever felt like food is the enemy, I do all the time, or like your cravings are controlling you, or even worse, that menopause is throwing metabolism into chaos, this episode is for you. Today, our guest is Sue Van Raes. She's a functional nutritionist, a food psychology specialist, and author of Food and Freedom. Talk about that resume. Sue's work is all about making peace with your plate and healing the deep-rooted patterns that keep you stuck in the cycles of restriction, guilt, and stress. Me. She also leads transformational women's retreats in Colorado, Costa Rica, and Bali. Sign me up. And helping women reconnect with their bodies and their well-being. So today on this episode, Sue, we're so excited to uncover why starving yourself in menopause is not a good idea and what your body actually needs, how to stop stress eating and cravings without guilt and restriction, and really the truth about menopause and metabolism. If it's not broken, just different, and we'll teach you how to work with it. So welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be with both of you. What a treat.
Yay.
Thank you.
Well, I feel like many of us women feel like our bodies right now are betraying us, right? During menopause, we're getting weight gain, we have cravings, we're exhausted. How does food psychology play into all of this?
It's such a good question, and I totally see so many women feeling so similar. So I think it's really important that we flip the whole "my body is betraying me" narrative, because it tends to really set us up to kind of be fighting against ourselves. And I know that it can feel challenging when there's so many changes upon us, but I also know that we need to be our greatest ally, and that menopause isn't about our bodies betraying us, but it's about our bodies evolving. And really, our bodies are asking for so many new strategies and to really be tuned into and listened to in a new way. And my experience of perimenopause and menopause has really been just that. It's been such an awakening into looking at things through a new lens. It's been such an awakening in looking at how I'm tending to myself and literally listening to myself more deeply. I don't know if you've experienced this, either of you, Courtney or Dawn, but for me, I feel like my intuition got so much louder, and the overriding or forcing through things that I was so good at in my early adult life, like, is totally expired. It just doesn't work anymore. And so I believe this time is an awakening for us to really look at the different needs that we're having and to start to get even more comfortable with like what our bodies are wanting and what our energy levels are wanting and what our rest needs are in a new way, so that we can really start to use these signals as new code, right? We can start to like look at cravings as data, or we can start to look at our metabolisms in a new way, in an adaptive way that starts to explore what it means to feed our bodies in this new code. And clearly, sleep can become even more imperative at this time of our lives. And so it's, instead of like creating this fight and this sort of displeased approach to how things are shifting, the minute that I changed that into more like a spiritual awakening and more into an inquiry that was more true, more whole, and more attuned and aligned with my true self, things started to work so much better. So,
girl, you are speaking our language, and thank you for saying all of those beautiful things. That menopause can be a very beautiful awakening. I read recently that women in their sort of late 40s, early 50s have more creativity, right? We're leaning in more to our intuitions. We're setting those boundaries for healthier relationships, whether it be with our spouses, partners, and or food. So, I think it's been so frustrating, Sue, for the longest time, because women who are listening to their intuition and knowing something is off have been dismissed. So if we can really utilize the intuition and start to look at it as data, that's so fascinating as to how we can move forward with our lives. For me, as I'm experiencing this emotional and hormonal roller coaster, emotional eating for me has certainly been an issue. And it's a huge topic around my circle of girlfriends, especially in midlife right now. How do we as women identify whether we're eating from emotion, habit, or true hunger? And how do we work with that?
Well, there's a couple things I just want to sort of start out by saying, and I wrote about this a lot in my book, Food and Freedom, and that is that emotional eating is inevitable for all of us. And we are so linked between feelings and food. There is just no separation. But what happens is we can watch that get way out of balance. And if we're starting to feel like that creeping in, that place where food is now not only, kind of an emotional comfort, but one that is something we're relying on so heavy, or a primary comfort in our lives that supersedes other things like connection or self-care or quiet time or downtime, then I think we can start to see that really this emotional eating, it's like, I think of it as like a whisper that our bodies are using to communicate that there's something we're needing emotionally that we're not getting. So clearly, our hormones are moving around and going in fluctuations that are going to create some external hunger. And maybe if we're experiencing like sleep disruptions and things like that, we're going to be noticing our cravings get higher. I mean, honestly, one bad night of sleep will increase your ghrelin levels by a significant amount. And all of a sudden, you'll find yourself craving more food, like physically hungrier, just from one disrupted night of sleep. Your ghrelin is your hunger hormone, and it has a lot to say about stress and a lot to say about not getting enough rest. And so these cues might mean that there's something that you're needing that you're not quite hitting the mark on. And I think that this time of life requires a lot of introspection. It's like we have the ability to pause and turn inward and start to listen more deeply. But as most of us know, that's hard to do when we're really busy and we're kind of moving from thing to thing. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I'm not paying attention, busyness can fully take over and I can start to get into, a very sort of almost like fight or flight response around my to-do list. And so when we start to soften, when we start to turn inward and create a little more space for ourselves, first of all, just that itself will fix a lot of these exacerbated experiences around emotional eating, just slowing down in itself. But then as we slow down, we start to actually hear more clearly what our souls are craving. And that in itself will really take it to a new level, because then we can start to add in other elements from our lives that are not food related and start to have self-soothing happening in a way that is so much more sustainable. But there's really interesting ways to start to listen to body hunger. And I really like to separate out the different kinds of hunger that we experience, because some of them are honestly coming from other parts of us that need something, another kind of ingredient. And sometimes we mistake it for food. Right? We'll be kind of craving something like, a connection with a friend or a break or some time to rest. And all of a sudden we feel hungry and we don't know how to feed that part of ourselves. So we start reaching for food because it's the easiest or the most automatic thing that we do. In my experience, if we can spend some time listening and getting more tuned into the body, we'll actually be able to recognize not only what kind of hunger we're having, but then what we're actually hungry for within that kind of hunger. And that could be something heart-based, like a heart hunger. It could be a soul hunger, but our bodies are the ones communicating to us this physical body hunger through those very common sensations, like that growling in your stomach or that feeling like your energy is dropping and that sort of thing. And that's when we move towards fueling our body with food. Does that help?
Yeah, that definitely helps. I feel like a lot of emotional eating too comes from stress. I know when I'm like overwhelmed with my to-do list or with work and, just everything, I'm like constantly going down to snack and grab like pretzels or this and that and like just shove it in my face. But I also know that as we're aging and going through menopause and perimenopause, our cortisol levels are all over the place, right? So this is like a big indicator of stress and fatigue on the body. And when your cortisol levels are off, this could be another reason, right? So it's, do you have any other helpful hints or tips of how to break this cycle, right? So if you're like craving something, I mean, I know slow down, but is there anything else where you're like, okay, like how can we connect with our bodies to know, oh, this is my heart that's asking for something, or this is my like gut because I'm so stressed out and maybe just drink some tea instead. Like, are there any other tips that you can maybe offer us? Because I need them. I know I'm constantly like, I need a cookie. And then I'm like, I don't need a cookie, but I need a cookie.
Totally. When our cortisol is elevated, which obviously can happen more readily in perimenopause and menopause, but really can happen all the time. I mean, our society is not exactly a calm place to live. And there's a lot going on a daily basis for all of us, no matter where we're at hormonally in our journeys. But what's interesting is cortisol, when it's elevated, it creates hunger hormones, and those hunger hormones can create those cravings that you're talking about. And what I find to be helpful is, first of all, like any time that we're in question around any of these bodily cues, any of these cravings whatsoever, there's always so much power in just, first of all, pausing. First of all, pausing. Sometimes getting a cup of tea is all we need, or sometimes taking a quick break or a quick walk is all we need. But what else I like to promote when it comes to kind of those cravings for comfort food has a lot to do with what kind of comfort food we're actually reaching for. I mean, there's so many different ways to comfort ourselves with yummy snacks and foods that are of the higher quality ingredients that can keep our blood sugar stable, that can help our stress level over time, because our blood sugar being stable is actually going to lower our cortisol. And when we bring more joy and pleasure into our lives, literally oxytocin lowers blood sugar. So the moment that we start to bring ourselves back into biochemical balance through some of the ways that we're eating and also some of the other practices that we can work with in our lives, we'll first of all get our biochemistry in check. And that's going to make everything so much easier, first of all. Then when we're craving those comfort foods, if there's still that residue left over, for me, it's like I always love to have something that's like naturally sweetened in the house, or something that's crunchy, salty, but that doesn't actually throw me out of balance. One of the ways I like to think about it is when we're looking at this spectrum of eating and the spectrum of pleasure, really, because that's what we're craving when we're craving these comfort foods, is something to help us feel good. It's like, okay, we imagine what it is we're going to eat. Maybe that in itself brings us some joy, right? Like the imagining of, like, we already have a dinner plan for tonight and I'm already imagining it because I'm going to go to the store and get a few ingredients and, feel just lightly inspired about it. It's no big fancy meal or anything on a weeknight, but it's something to look forward to. So there's something there, right, in that just imagining. And then we get to the actual experience of eating. And this is actually where a lot of times things go awry, because the pleasure that we often are thinking about and imagining and visualizing tends to fall to the wayside when we actually start eating, because we rush and we check out. And sometimes we're run by guilt or shame, so we don't want to feel those feelings. So we just check out of our bodies completely. And when we check out of our bodies completely, we're actually not really enjoying the cookie, right? We're not really savoring the cookie. We're not really taking that pleasure really to the absolute maximum that it can offer us, because of the ways in which we've been taught to override, to check out, to go so fast, to eat fast. And when we can slow down in the actual eating of the food, we can bring our senses to the table. We can like experience it through all of the five senses, and it can really increase our pleasure. Then there's also this third phase, which I think we often overlook when it comes to pleasure and self-soothing and comfort, and that is the reminiscing. So it's interesting because what we do in the moment might feel good, but does it feel good to have done? And when we can look back on the experience with fondness and with joy and with feeling like it was a satiating moment or a pleasurable moment or even an indulgent moment, does that come with the reminiscing? If we're missing any of these elements, it's not really pleasure, right? It's a moment of some kind of dopamine hit that is so fast and furious and so quickly vanishes that we can hardly even remember it, if we can remember it at all. I mean, I know for me, like I've had experiences where I forget that I even ate the thing, or I barely can even access that joy because I wasn't really present for it. And so when we bring all three layers and all three kind of time frames into this experience of eating, it seems like, in my experience and with the women that I've worked with, that there's a longer, kind of more even, more sustainable pleasure that we get to have from the comfort food itself. And that is so different than that gripping and that shame and that guilt and that holding that so many of us do, regardless of the ingredients, to be honest. It's so much about that holding on so tight that tells our body to hold on to weight. It's more about how we are relating to the food and the meaning that we have created about the food. We can all think of things that we have meaning about, like things that we have considered bad or that we have considered good and that we've made a story up about. And I think it's a really powerful time to like rewrite the stories and to look for the meanings that we've associated and to see if they're even true or if they're true for us.
You know, you strike a chord with me, Sue, because first of all, damn those Girl Scouts. Girl Scout cookies and menopause do not mix.
Mm-mm. I just finished a box yesterday.
But me too. Like eating a half a box of Samoyas yesterday felt awesome in the moment.
Totally.
It did not feel awesome late last night and this morning. And so when we have those moments of emotional eating or whatever it may be, I mean, it felt great to freaking, have that half a box of Girl Scout cookies yesterday. I felt great. You talk a lot about finding peace with your plate. I am not finding peace this morning with my plate of Girl Scout cookies. What do you mean when you say that? Finding peace with your plate, and how we as women, how can we find more peace with our plates and less shame and guilt with our plate of Girl Scout cookies?
It's such a powerful question. And I do think it comes back to the last part that I was sharing. Like when you're reminiscing this morning about your Girl Scout cookies, it doesn't sound to me like you're experiencing pleasure.
No, I'm shaming those Girl Scouts. Like shame
And so
on those Girl Scouts for fucking with a bunch of menopausal women.
I get it. And it's so confusing. But then I'm thinking to myself, okay, so what can we learn here from this situation as we go forward? Like for me, I just want to say, first of all, like the perception of perfection is a complete lie. So no one's doing it perfectly. And I say this to my clients all the time because I think people think when I start working with them, first of all, people think I'm doing it perfectly. And I see it when I run into my clients in the grocery store and like whatever, right? Like that's a whole other thing. But I'm not doing it perfectly. And I have never worked with anyone or met anyone who is. So that's the thing I want to say, first of all. This is not about perfection. This is about feeling good in our bodies. For me, if I eat sugar, especially in significant amounts, I don't feel good in my body. And I know that truth because I learned it since I was a kid, because I have really severe hypoglycemia. So I could give myself a migraine by having, a whole bunch of sugar in the morning, and it just ruins my day. And so I have linked, not on purpose, but this has happened just in the course of trial and error. I have linked my eating with how I feel. And I say this a lot. We can eat to feel how we want to feel. We just have to learn what that means for each of us. We need to uncover a little bit more about how our own unique metabolisms work, maybe consider how our blood sugar responds to certain foods and how we feel when our blood sugar going up and down inside of those experiences. But what's interesting is for me, when I feel bad, not just emotionally bad, but when I feel physically bad about a food that I have eaten in the recent past, it has really helped me to shift that relationship with that particular type of food going forward, because I don't want to feel that way. And there's occasions where, we all make decisions and we throw ourselves under the bus. But on a day-to-day basis, if we can start to get more clarity on how we want to feel, first of all, and then what gets us there, second of all, so that we can start to move in that direction. We don't need to make up meaning about good or bad or guilt-ridden or not, but more so just considering what makes us feel strong, powerful, free, peaceful, in balance, joyful, pleasurable, all the things, whatever your words are, and then move from there. So in your case, Dawn, it's yes, maybe you did savor every bite of the Girl Scout cookies. I don't know. Was it a pleasurable experience? And did it get you to where you want to be right now?
Yes and no.
Okay. And so I think there's a little bit of just reflection that could be really useful for you in looking at when and how that disconnect happened. Because the pleasure was good in the moment, it sounds like. And it sounds to me like maybe you were even in a place of savoring the food. But as you started to notice how that impacted your metabolism or how you feel today or your mood, that might be something enough that could anchor in a little bit of a shift in the behavior if it needs to be, but not because it was bad, only because of how you feel now. Mm-hmm. One of my kids last week was having some dessert. I can't remember, one of the evenings after school, and he's in his teens and in college, and he ate some pretty sugary stuff that he bought himself at Whole Foods, but just was watching a movie and I think overate some sweets, and told me the next day that he noticed he was really a lot more irritable than usual. And it was interesting to hear him make that connection because, it's at that young of an age, we're not always paying attention to those subtleties. But I noticed that he said, yeah, I don't want to do that again because I really didn't like how I felt the next day. And so either I would have way less than what I had or something else because I want to preserve, my mood for the following day. So it's those little moments that are like teachers for us, and we can choose how we want to integrate. Sometimes we might not care how we feel if we have the freedom to have the day to move slower or to, take some more time for ourselves that we're not needing to be as on. But I think it's a really personal choice. And I think that the most important piece of it isn't bad or good, but it's consciousness, it's choice, it's awareness. And when we move from awareness, we're giving ourselves right there the power. And I think that's what we want, is we want to have the power, not the food.
I think a lot of us too, right? Like you indulge in a plate of cookies and then the next day you have remorse. But also I feel like us as women and dealing with our bodies changing and weight gain and all that stuff, we're really looking for a quick fix. So there's been a long history of yo-yo dieting, right? So like what's the fastest fix? I ate a plate of cookies, now I need to like cleanse and starve myself for a week. How do you approach this, and how do you guide women and men to a more sustainable, nourishing relationship with food instead of like, okay, I fucked up and now I need to, go throw up. Not that I no nobody should do that, but you know what I'm like.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, it's a complex conversation, and everyone is going to be coming at this with a different story, a different history, and a different way of managing it. But we don't necessarily need to be moving with body is enemy and diet cycle is the way. I mean, it's just very kind of all in, all out, and it starts to really get us into this toxic cycle. So I think a really important place to start, and I love doing this exercise with my clients, and that is, what are the rules that you have given yourself? Because the rules that most of us have for how we're eating, and let me just say, the rules, not all of us, not the ones we're following, but the ones that we think we should be following, come from someone else's blueprint. And so it's really hard to stick to them because they're not necessarily our own. We're taking them in from like diet culture. We're taking them in from society and from all these different belief systems we've taken on and all the meanings we've made about food. So once again, let's come back to what actually feels good in our bodies and start noticing how different foods make us feel so that we can get out of that good or bad label and use food as more of information. And also, like, wouldn't it be cool if food was neutral, right? Where we could just think food is energizing us, food is giving us life force, food is giving us nutrients, and start to unwind from all of these stories around our eating. I think that dieting and the diet culture teaches us that we're either on or off, or good or bad, or succeeding or failing. It's such a different mentality than looking at eating to feel how we want to feel. And as we start to get more and more into biochemical balance, then we're going to have even a better understanding of what that means for us. And what I mean by biochemical balance is when our blood sugar is in healthy range, we have the ability to feel more in balance ourselves. And so when we learn what that means for us, that's where the peace comes from. That's where that the sustainability comes from, is feeding our body with our kind of like our biomarkers in mind. Like I think that it's often overlooked that our blood sugar informs our brain chemistry. And so if we're eating in balance, we're going to feel better on a brain chemical level. We're going to have all of those really good neurotransmitters in our favor. And that's going to help with some of these cycles, these downward spirals that we find ourselves in, because really a lot of it has to do with being out of balance. And so bringing our blood sugar, eating high quality protein, high quality fat, and high quality whole carbohydrates at every meal, staying in that healthy blood sugar range right there, every single thing we do, including how we think, is going to work better for us. Yeah. It's like, this is how food works for us.
Speaking of that, and I think you bring up some really interesting points, but for many of us, our hormones at this moment in time are so off balance, right? And so we're having these shifts in our hormones up and down, and perimenopause and menopause. How, in your opinion, and all of your knowledge and your studies and working with clients directly, how does that impact our metabolism? And with that, what sort of food should we be leaning into during this menopausal journey?
Yeah, such a great question. So first I want to say that we each have our own unique metabolic profile. And so, what I've noticed for me in my perimenopause and menopause journey is that my metabolism is the same, but it's demanding more from me. So, where I was before I went into perimenopause was still needing high levels of protein and fat. I'm a very high protein type, and my body does so much better when I use high protein, high quality, good fats in my diet as like front and center. Carbs a little bit less, and then of course tons of micronutrients like non-starchy vegetables. But what I noticed, I know how to stay in my biochemical range. But when I did a CGM during the early days of perimenopause, first of all, that was incredible and so informative. And I highly recommend it that everyone does at least a month or so with a CGM, because it is something that absolutely gives you the data of what's going on in your body.
What is a CGM? I don't even know what that is.
Oh, really? Okay. It's continuous glucose monitor, and it's very accessible nowadays, smartphone friendly. You wear a little patch on your arm. You can scan it with your phone as much as you like, and it will tell you exactly what's happening with your blood sugar real time. It's so valuable. I did a month-long trial with Levels Health a few years ago, and it was wild to see that some of the things that I was eating, well, most of what I was eating was actually really in balance. And then there were these few moments where things fell apart. And one of them was actually I was at a coffee shop and I was ordering a chai, and I was going to drive home from this appointment. I was like, oh, I'll get a chai for the drive home. And I always get unsweetened chai and add my own sweetener because I never know how much sweetener's in a chai. So I got all the way through this little lineup and got to the ordering counter and ordered a chai, and the woman said, we're out of unsweetened chai. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you have? And so she's like, oh, well, our regular chai isn't really very sweet. And I didn't totally believe her, but I was like, well, I already waited in line and, it's one chai. So I bought the regular chai and then I drank it on my 15-minute drive home. And my blood sugar was through the roof from one chai. Now, was I that sensitive 20 years ago? I don't know, because I didn't test my blood sugar in real time. I might have been, or I might have been somewhat sensitive. But when I saw those numbers, I was instantly like, oh goodness, that is not good for me, because I know it's going to be followed by a crash. So I did whatever I needed to do to kind of bring it back into balance as quickly as I could. But these moments are really insightful because they really show us what's happening. And for me, I don't love obsessively tracking. It's not something I tell my clients to do. It's not something that I like to do myself. But doing research, I do like to do. And that to me was like a 30-day, research plan for my own blood sugar. And it changed everything because I saw exactly what happens. I saw exactly what happens when I added the right foods in to bring myself back into balance. And I saw how I felt with different kinds of things up and down and all around. And that was so helpful. So now, I have that as sort of a reminder when I'm working through my own stuff. But what I really noticed is that when I was younger, I needed the same things, but I had a little bit more wiggle room. Yeah. And as I get more and more into menopause, I just have noticed my wiggle room is less. And I really need to fuel my body with high protein, high quality, good fats to stay in range. And then my cravings are less anyways. And then my brain chemistry is working in my favor. And I have it's literally going to shift the cravings from the ground up to begin with when we really stay in range. And so that helped me so much. But it did really amplify that this time in my life, if I want to feel my best, I just need to really stay on top of it and be aware of how my blood sugar is responding meal by meal, not day by day, but literally meal by meal. And that makes such a big difference.
You say wiggle room. We all had a little more wiggle room, and we had more wiggle room in our genes, right? That ship has sailed.
Yeah, I think that it depends on the person. And it depends on so many factors in our lives. But I think it's so important to look at this time as a reckoning, as an opportunity, as a befriending with ourselves, and as a place where we can start to hone in and start to get more and more aligned with both what we're doing and then, of course, feeling good about what we have been doing, right? There's doing it and then there's feeling good about doing it in the past. And it really makes a difference when we can find that sweet spot for what works. And, I think that it is very common to gain a little bit of weight during menopause. But then I don't think it has to be common to gain a lot of weight. And I don't think it has to be common to feel like our bodies are changing so rapidly that we can't keep up. If that's happening, I think we can circle back and really start to look for those biomarkers that show us where we're out of range. I think when we gain and lose 5 pounds here and there, that feels fairly normal, no matter where we're at in our hormonal journeys, right? Like lots of women gain a couple pounds just with premenstrual times of the month. And then, our bodies are fluid and are dynamic, and it's hard to be tracking our weight day by day because there's so much room for fluctuation. But if you're noticing that things are going way out of range, then it's a really beautiful thing to circle back and see where you're out of range in your biomarkers and in your biochemistry.
What are the things I think that a lot of us women make in perimenopause and menopause are, cutting certain foods out or changing our diets rapidly? What are some of the big mistakes do you see that women are making trying to fix menopause? Is it like, I'm cutting out carbs and their body might still need carbs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it like, I'm doing all just smoothies? I'm sure we've all had our fair share of what we're trying to do, but are there any big things that you see and want to kind of guide women on, don't do this?
Yeah, the first one I think is deprivation. Deprivation is something that a lot of people think is their only option. People think they have to be hungry to look how they want to look. People feel like they have to be depriving themselves to be acceptable, to be perfect, to be doing it right. And I absolutely don't agree with that. In fact, I believe that in those moments of deprivation, especially if they're, over a long period of time, we actually are training our bodies to do the exact opposite of what we want. We're going more and more into survival mode, more and more into these states in our nervous system that tell our body to hold on to body weight. So we don't, that approach is definitely something that usually isn't even sustainable, but it really doesn't last and it doesn't work. And it's actually untrue, right? It's untrue that we need to live in a state of hunger, and also impossible. Also find that similar to what you said, Courtney, like this belief that we have to cut out carbs. And I do have clients where I've had to have people bring carbs back on board. And I think we might want to discern between like carbs that are going to be useful for our bodies and then carbs that are going to throw our bodies way into that biochemical crash and burn type of cycle. And those carbs are going to be the ones that are full of white sugar and white flour and processed. And it doesn't mean never. It just means let's come back to the foundation of what is there on a regular daily basis and make our foundation super strong so that when we want the Girl Scout cookies or we want the treat or we want the dessert or whatever it is, that's not the problem because our foundation is unshakable. What I find is that if we can bring in awareness of what our metabolisms need, and we can start to look at finding that balance, then that sort of negates some of those ways that we try to override. Even with, I have a program actually called Consciously Keto. And oftentimes I've heard people say like, oh, well, keto, we can't have any carbs. And it's so interesting because that's also a complete myth and not true. And yes, in some cases during like ketosis, we lower carbs enough to get our bodies to burn fat for fuel, but we don't have to eat no carbs. And we might be eating lower sugar carbs like berries and roasted beets or something like that instead of, potato chips and pasta. But at the same time, we're still feeding our bodies from all three macronutrients and lots of plants for fiber and micronutrients that are going to give us all those wonderful nutrients for our cells. So I think it's an interesting thing to just watch in how we tend to go to these extremes and then how the extremes generally kind of fall apart anyways. Does that help?
Yeah. I mean, you are such a wealth of information, Sue. I know
Oh, thank you.
you have a book and you have many programs and you have all of these things and you're seeing clients all across the United States. We certainly would love to have you back on the Hot Flash Health podcast, because not only are you a very wise woman who's experienced this, but you're coaching and training women around their relationships with food, particularly during these hormonal health journeys that we're all experiencing. So how do our listeners, Sue, find more of you and engage with some of your programs and read your book and get more Sue in their lives?
Thank you. Well, everything that I do is all under the umbrella of Boulder Nutrition, my business, and that is bouldernutrition.com. So that's how you find that. You can also find my book, Food and Freedom, on my website, but also on Amazon and all the other places that you buy books. And it's not directed specifically to women in menopause, but it is specifically directed to women. And I do think that there's so much deeper information in there that sort of would accent a lot of the things we talked about today, a lot of the research behind what I was saying, a lot of the science behind what I was saying that's hard to kind of put into a short podcast. But that's a really great resource. And then I'm at Boulder Nutrition on Instagram, and that's a place I love to be as well, to connect with my community. Yeah, I just am here as a resource and on the journey myself, and always learning and, finding ways to make food a friend and something that feels good for how we live.
I know you also do amazing retreats. I was reading, Colorado, Bali, and Costa Rica, and I'm going to Costa Rica next week. So I'm so excited to come back and talk to you about Costa Rica. But I know that's another option and something I'm.
Oh yeah, I love my retreats so much. I mean, there's just such a great opportunity to immerse into time for ourselves and how we can really just pause. And I think it's like so needed, especially for women. We're just constantly holding so much. And I just, nothing makes me happier than seeing women take a break and focus on themselves and, kind of come home to themselves in a way that is healing, and just so much that we can give ourselves with this, just a little space. I love being with women on retreat, and it's such a passion for me. So it would be always a joy to have you.
Thanks. Well, thank you for being on. We're so excited to have you today. And as Dawn said, a wealth of information. And it's really about, hating your food and loving your food and knowing that it nurtures you and is there to help you grow. And, we all just need to have a different approach to food. I think that's been ingrained in us, right? Like food's the bad person.
Yeah. One thing I'd love to say as we wrap up is just like, if you're curious about how your metabolism works and you want to understand more about your unique metabolism, that's something that I help people with all the time. And that is such a game changer, because when we know what we need, we can really start to find our way to that so much easier than just guessing.
Smart. That's smart. I'll probably be calling you on that too, because I don't know.
Me too.
Thank you again. Dawn and I are really so appreciative of you being on, and we'll definitely have you back. I'm sure we can dive into many, many chapters of your books and just learn more and absorb from you. But for all of you listeners, hopefully you had a great time on this episode. Please reach out to Sue for anything that you might need. And stay sassy, stay classy, and keep those hot flashes in check, y'all. We'll see you on the next episode. And that's a wrap on today's episode. Remember, menopause may be a wild ride, but together we've got this.
And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok at Hot Flash Health.
Stream and subscribe to us on any of your favorite listening platforms like YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
And of course, share your thoughts with us. We love hearing from our amazing listeners.
And until next time, stay sassy, stay fabulous, and keep those hot flashes in check.
Yeah, girl.
Woo!